Better in 1970, and this is about my 1970 hitchhiking Odyssey. I was going to subtitle it Adventures in Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. But when I look around this audience, I'm sure that there's no one here that could imagine such diversions of misbehavior. So I'll kind of stick to mostly the facts. By the way, I bought this shirt, truly, in 1970, before I went off on this Odyssey that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. I had, at that point, by the way, was divorced from my first wife very recently, and hadn't met my second wife, who, by the way, I have 8 children with. I'm not married anymore, but I have 8 children with Dawn. But I decided I wanted to see what was going on in the country. It was a time of great change in America, some of it positive, and a lot of it very confusing. And we were in the midst of a horrific war in Vietnam. There was the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the farm workers movement. There were a lot of important things going on, and people were out just doing it. They were just seeing it. So with my bright clothes and $7, I left Las Vegas, which is where I lived, and got dropped off by my dad. I was 25 years old when I got dropped off by my dad. And the adventure began, and it was amazing, and I learned a lot, and I'll never forget many parts of it. To give you some idea of the nature of the way things change and one has to adapt, I was going to hitchhike first to Alaska. I still haven't been to Alaska. There are 2 states I haven't been to. You can guess the other one. Some islands. But I was going to hitchhike out of Las Vegas, and you go north. And by the way, if you're going to go east, you take basically a right turn on a different freeway. The first ride, which was Karen, Roberta, and Bill, oh, and their German Shepherd dog, Sheba. The young lady that was not connected to anybody said, "We're going to New Jersey." Oh, I think that might have been after we smoked a joint, but don't worry about that part. New Jersey happens to be where I was born, but that had nothing to do, it was totally a coincidence. And she said, "Would you like to ride with us?" Well, being a careful, deliberate person, I took nearly a half a second before I said, "Sure, sounds great, pass me back the joint." And we went to New Jersey. It took 3 days of driving, and I drove actually more than half of the way. And it was a beautiful time to be on the road, and people were maybe a little less cautious and a little more adventurous at that point. And we went to Jackson Township, New Jersey, and stayed with them 3 days after we got there, and slept on the floor and all this stuff. But then, I mean, it was really amazing. And from there, I decided that I would, with one short stop, that I would hitchhike up to Maine, where my uncle and aunt lived, in Gardner, Maine, only to discover that they were in Europe. So the best laid plans and all that stuff. So I decided it was time to see what Canada was like. Well, this was in 1970, and Canada was being slightly cautious about hippie-looking people who might be dodging some draft or whatever. And they turned me away at the Canadian border at Jackson Station. Now that's a challenge. So, remember, I'm on foot, and this is in a remote part of Maine, Quebec border. So I walk down the road until they can't see me at the check station anymore, and I cut across the woods. The next thing you know, I'm in Quebec, and all the people speak French. Well, you know, you can get along if you know a few words, and it was wonderful. And I had a wonderful time in Canada. And I went to Quebec City, and I went to Montreal, and I met this young Canadian guy named John Falls, actually was his name. And he gave me a ride all the way from Toronto to almost to the British Columbia border. And we made arrangements to meet later and visit all the national parks in California in about a month. And we did that. We did that. But the point was, I was pretty adaptable. And again, keep in mind, I know this is just terrible to your ears, but one common thing that people said when you got in the car was, "Hey man, you want to smoke a joint?" How can you refuse such hospitality? I don't think I ever did refuse. And the thing about the journey was I met amazing people, different kinds of people. And it was relatively safe in 1970 to hitchhike. I don't know if I'd recommend that now, but mostly people were kind and friendly and generous and open. And I'm going to skip pretty much most of the journey because we don't have time here. I keep looking over at Ben to see if this link is out. But the things that I experienced are with me to this day. I met a university professor. Oh my God, what a, oh, geez. His name was Rex Johnson. He was an engineering prof at the University of Washington in Seattle. And he picked up every hitchhiker, and the car was a total cloud of smoke. And people just smoked and laughed and begged for munchies. And, I mean, it was amazing. The thing that I will take away, and oh, one other guy that I think I have time to mention. Some guy picks me up in the Rocky Mountains a little bit later. And he's driving a little Triumph sports car with a 4-speed on the floor. He only had one arm. It was pretty amazing. And he was going fishing in the Rockies with his son, young son. He said, "Hey, you ever been fishing in the Rockies?" "No, not really." "Hey, we got a lot of extra equipment and food, and we'd love to have you." And so we went fishing, and I caught actual fish. It's amazing. The thing about hitchhiking for me was it taught me that human beings are so very different and so very open and so ready to share their stories. I heard a lot of stories. This is a storytelling event, and I'm very pleased that it is. And I heard a lot of stories in 1970, and I had wonderful times. And so I guess I'll conclude with the comment that if you ever have a chance to just put your thumb out and go for a ride, you do not know who you meet, you do not know where you'll go. You can't imagine how good brownies taste. It's a great way to see the world from the ground level. And I loved every minute about it, and it stuck with me all these many years later. So now, as I conclude here, then I was kind of young and stupid. Now I'm just older, Still stupid, but still ready for the next adventure. Thank you.